Hello and welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Kristin Roth. I'm an Associate Director of Admissions at the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth. It is a beautiful day here in Hanover, New Hampshire. The sun is shining, and we are excited to talk to you about how Tuck evaluates applications and applicants. I'm going to give you an overview of what we look for in evaluations and applications and in evaluating those applications. But my goal is to really answer your questions. So we're going to leave a lot of time for Q&A at the end. Please feel free to submit your questions along the way. I will be answering them as I can. But let's just get started with how we evaluate applications. So the first thing I want to cover and highlight for you is that there are multiple elements to the application, and you know this already probably if you've done any research, and you know that schools are going to be interested in your academics and your test scores. We're going to look here at Tuck at your work experience, and we're going to see that from the work history section of our application as well as the resume. We're going to look at your essays and your recommendations and the interview, and that tells us a little bit more about what you've done in the past, what you're hoping to do in the future, how you tell your story. So each piece of the application tells us something about you as an applicant. But what I want to emphasize here is these are what we use to evaluate your applications. But what I want to highlight more is why we use these things to evaluate you as an applicant. And so it's important, if we're going to talk about evaluating applications, it's important for you to understand what we do here at the Tuck School of Business. So what I want to highlight for you here is our mission. Tuck's mission is to educate wise leaders to better the world of business. That wise leadership encompasses things like empathy, to be able to understand different perspectives and diverse perspectives, as well as to work across differences. It encompasses judgment of when and how to take risks, important. And it also encompasses confident humility, to know what you know and to be willing to share it, but also to know what you don't know and to be willing to learn it. So we are going to be looking for the foundations in your background for those areas of wise leadership. Where have you started to develop those things and exercise those skills already? But we also want to know, how can we help you grow in your wise leadership in your practice of business? So we are looking for your impact already, but also your potential for impact. And you can show this in a number of ways. It really is a balancing act. The first thing I want to highlight for you is that we're going to look very closely at your academics. And I talked a little bit about the academics and test scores. What we want to see here is your academic history and your potential in our curriculum. So we're going to look at your undergraduate grades and your background, undergraduate history, as well as any graduate coursework you may have taken, and at your standardized tests, which will be the GMAT, the GRE. Possibly, if you are a non-native English speaker, there might be some tests of English speaking. We'll look at those as well. And the question that we have in the back of our minds is, can you handle the rigorous curriculum at the Tuck School? In particular, we'll be paying close attention to your quantitative ability because the coursework is quantitatively rigorous. The important thing to think about here is we do not look at this in isolation. We don't just look at your GPA or your overall results. We're going to look at this in context. So we want to understand the school you went to and the major you chose, the coursework you took. Were there any trends in your academic background? Did you start low and go up? Did you have a down semester or term? What other activities, jobs, or sports were you involved in? So it is very important to understand that we're not just looking at one number. We do look at the context of what you did. Did you do nothing else and do really, really well in your academics? Did you do nothing else and maybe have some down moments? How are you going to balance things out? Those are all questions we ask. Now, there is no required major. You don't have to be a business major or an economics major or something like that. That's not our question. Our question is, can you do the work? And you can show this in a number of ways. So it could be that while you were an art history major, you took quantitative classes, or your background and did well in them. Your background might include, your work experience might include quantitative work, or you might have done really well in your standardized test scores. Or you may have taken coursework post-graduation that shows us that you can succeed in the academic curriculum. So we're going to be looking at all those pieces. It is not necessary for you to have done all those pieces, but those are all things we look at, and we put those all together. Now, one thing that I just mentioned, but keep in mind that we're looking at everything in context. We want to see, what do your academics and your standardized test scores tell us as a whole about you? Important to remember, we don't have minimums. We don't have a minimum GPA. We don't have a minimum GMAT or GRE, but it is a very competitive process. So your job is to submit your strongest application. Usually there's not much you can do about your undergraduate or graduate grades at this point. If there is something you could do, you should do those things, and strong. The important thing, though, is that there are parts of that you can affect. For example, getting quantitative experience at work, or taking courses post-graduation that can show your abilities in some of the areas we have questions on. Submit your strongest application, and just remember that the academic portion and the standardized test portion, that performance just helps us understand better your potential and your ability to contribute to study groups and to your classmates, as well as your ability to succeed in the curriculum. So the next thing I want to highlight is your professional background or your professional experience. This is another thing we evaluate in the context of the application. So the important thing to remember here is quality is more important than quantity. We are not looking for a certain number of years of experience. The range of experience in our class varies widely. Some work experience is important to us. We want you to have a frame of reference for the learning that you will be undergoing in the curriculum, but we also want you to be able to contribute to the learning of your classmates, and they will learn a lot from you just as you will be learning a lot from them. So that some work experience is very important in that regard. But the real question for us, more than quantity of work experience, is the quality. The question for us is also, are you ready for the MBA? Why do you want your MBA now? So some of the things we'll be looking at in your work experience, in your professional section of the application, we want to know your role. What are you doing? What's been your impact in your role? What's been your contribution to your organization or your organizations? What's been your progression? Is it fairly typical or is it atypical, and how and why? What's your level of responsibility? Again, is it fairly typical for somebody with your level of experience, or have you progressed and gained responsibility atypically? And again, why? What have you learned? Where are your opportunities to learn more? Where do you still need to grow? Those are all important pieces of what we evaluate as we look at your application. Now, you don't have to work in a certain industry. You know, there are certain industries that we see a lot of people applying to business school from, but we also have industries where people are fairly unique in their background. All of those help create a diverse class where our students can learn from each other, so it doesn't have to be from a certain industry. Your contribution in your organization, the impact and the learning are what's important. Now, it's also important to recognize that it's not just what you've done at work, but how you've done it. Remember, we talked about those wise leadership skills. Have you shown the ability to tackle things with empathy, judgment, and confident humility? You'll be learning about that more in our curriculum, but we want to know that you have the basics for it. Have you understood these concepts are things that we practice on a regular basis? Failure is important because it teaches us almost better than success does, or better than success does. And so we want to see that you've been challenged, you've possibly failed, and you've learned from it. We want to see your potential to grow professionally. And we want to see that you have the ability to have positive impact, not just on your growth, but also on your classmates' growth and experiences. That's your contribution we would like to see it tuck. So we're going to look at this in your resume. Obviously, that's going to tell us a little bit about your progression. We're going to look at this in the work history section of our application. Essays will tell us a lot about how you tell your story in terms of your professional learning, growth, experience. Depending on what the essay topic is, you have different ways of highlighting that. And really importantly, our professional recommendations. Professional recommendations give us great information. They are an important piece of the application, and they're the one really objective look into your candidacy. Now, you don't touch your professional recommendations, so that's an important thing that we know and we remember. But you do control who you ask to do your recommendations. And it's important for you to prepare your recommenders. Help them understand why you want an MBA. So be thoughtful. When you sit down with them to ask if they can write you a recommendation, be sure to explain your goals, why you need an MBA, and why you're interested in specific schools. And finally, we're going to look at the personal side. We want to know who you are. Who are we looking at to potentially join our community? We want to know the unique qualities and attributes that you bring. We want to know, can you meet challenges? Can you fail and pick yourself back up? Can you learn from those challenges? Can you create opportunities for yourself? And can you create opportunities for others? Those are the essences of wise leadership. So how are we going to see these things? Well, we're going to see these things in a lot of different ways. But one of the things we'll look at is your involvement in and out of school and work. Have you really dived in? Have you given your heart and soul to something? Have you really committed and said, this is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to engage and be involved? So we're going to look at things like decision making. Why have you made the choices you have? Remember, we talked about judgment as being one of those areas of wise leadership. That's where your decision making comes in. We're going to look at, have you failed or been challenged and lived with it and learned from it? There's that confident humility coming in. Have you been successful? That's the confidence part of the confident humility, but also have you failed and learned from it? How will your past experiences contribute to future goals and success? And will you contribute to the community at Tech, both in and out of the classroom? That hits a lot of the empathy, that working across differences and being able to understand diverse perspectives. You'll grow in that further in your MBA curriculum, but we want to see that you've shown some evidence of it before. So where are we going to see that? I mentioned that we're going to look at your activities. We want to see what you've done both at work, in your communities, and in your academic experience. We also will look at your essays. How do you tell your story? What are the things that are shining as the themes or the values that you're highlighting in your essays, in your interview? This is an important place that you tell your story as well. And how do others tell your story? What do other people highlight? And so that'll come again in your recommendations. What do your supervisors or people you've worked with in the past say about you in terms of who you are? So these are your opportunities to tell your story, and you need to be ready to do that. So very important piece, though, is to remember there is no formula for admissions. It is truly a holistic process. So we are evaluating you as a whole. You are not just a number. Concentrate on being authentic to yourself. Present your strongest candidacy. It's not about who you think we want you to be. It's about who you are, and presenting that to each school you're applying to so they understand well what you bring. Own who you are. There is no such thing as a perfect candidate. Every school is going to be looking for different things. Every class is going to be slightly different. But we at Tuck, we know that our school and our students benefit from having a very diverse class. And the MBA is also a very versatile degree. And so it can make sense for a lot of different people. Own who you are. Be the authentic you. Now, what does that mean? It means that one of the most important things that you can do to help your application process is to figure out what your story is. Get to know yourself. Your motivations behind pursuing an MBA, what are they? What is it? Why do you really want this? What are your post-MBA goals? Where do you want to go, both in the short term and the long term? And what do you want to get out of that 2-year experience? And what do you have to contribute? Those are critical parts of your story that you need to think about and you need to be able to talk about. Your application will be stronger in the end if you take the time in the beginning to understand these things up front. And by getting to know yourself and presenting the authentic you to us, we'll get to know you as well, and you'll help guide us as we think and learn about how you'll thrive in, contribute to, and benefit from this really extraordinary Tuck experience and Tuck community. So I'm going to turn it over to questions in just a minute, but a few tips to help you think about the admissions process or as you move forward in the admissions process. The most important thing is to use the resources that are available to you. So think about, one, make sure you're getting emails from the schools you're interested in. If you're not already on the Tuck email list, you should get on it, and that just means starting a profile with us. Attend events when we're in your area, or more virtual events like the one you're doing right now. And you can find those on the event page on our website. Reach out to students and alumni. This is a great tool to get to know each school a little bit. And there are opportunities to do that at Tuck. You can learn more about that on our website as well. One of the best ways to learn what Tuck is about virtually is to subscribe to our Tuck 360 MBA blog. We tell some great stories about our students and what they're doing, where they're going. We also give some great and very candid advice about the admissions process, so I encourage you to use that. Follow us on social media. You get a lot of quick information and timely information from that. And most importantly, visit. Tuck is unique in offering any student or any applicant who would like to come to campus to interview during our open interview season. You can do that by signing up for a visit on our website. And you should, if you're going to interview and self-select an interview, which Tuck also allows you to do, please pay attention to the deadlines for the rounds that you're applying for when that interview needs to be, but you can sign up for that on our website as well. All right, so with that, I want to get to your questions because I know there are probably lots of them out there, and I've got a few questions right here. So I'm going to start to scan through and see what we've got. So one of the first questions we have is a question on the weight placed on graduate degree or versus an undergraduate degree. Which one is more important, or are they both? And I would say they're both important, so we want to see both. What we really want to see is what your academic potential is. We also want to understand how have you applied yourself over time. So that if you look at standardized tests, for example, standardized tests are a one shot in time. It's, you can study up for the test, but the test in and of itself doesn't show your effort over time. What we will see in your academic experience is your effort over time. But we also recognize that people grow over time as well, and the 4 or so years that you put into an undergraduate degree may or may not tell the full story. We will be looking at the undergraduate performance and trends. We will also look at graduate performance. The other piece I would say about if you have a graduate degree, what we're going to be looking at is why does the MBA make sense in context with all of your education? So that would be a helpful piece to understand is why is this next degree, an MBA, a good complement to the academic experience you already have. So keep that in mind. Okay, so the next question, I'm trying to understand it, and if I didn't quite understand it correctly, if whoever wrote this one in can make sure that we relook at it. The question is, quantitative aptitude is useful, but only with quality. How does that get evaluated? So I'm assuming what we're talking about is your ability to succeed in the quantitative curriculum, but also your ability to succeed overall. That may not be the right interpretation of that question, so I apologize if it's not. Quantitative aptitude is important, obviously, because there are a lot of quantitative pieces to the MBA. However, it is not the only piece we look at. We also want to see who you are overall. And that's why that personal piece of the evaluation process is important. But also, we're going to look at, just because the quantitative is important, we're not going to want, we're going to want to see that you were successful in other parts of your of your academic experience as well. We expect people to contribute overall. So what we're looking at is performance over time. We're also going to look at how have you performed at work. So we're going to look at all those pieces. Now, if I didn't fully answer that question, please write back in with a little bit more clarity on what that question means, because I'm not sure I entirely grasped it. I apologize. So how much emphasis do you apply on the integrated reasoning section of the GMAT? So as many of you know, that is a relatively new section of the GMAT. It is an important section. We are still evaluating what that really means over time, because there's limited data on how people perform and how that relates to the integrated reasoning section. Is still, a work in progress in terms of how important it is. What I would say is you need to give it your very best information, and a low score will stand out. A high score, because there's not a whole lot of variation in scoring. You get 1 through 8 and that's it. But a high score will also stand out as well, that you have the ability to analyze and reason. And that is something that early indications show that helps us understand how you might succeed in the curriculum. It's not the only piece, but the integrated reasoning piece is important. It is not, as I said, it is not something we have kind of a final conclusion on, but what I would say is go into your GMAT with an acknowledgement that you need to perform your best on that section and not treat it as a throwaway section. Okay, so this is a question about recommendations. Would you rather see a recommendation from my boss's boss or a cross-functional partner who may be at my level or one above? Okay, so recommendations can be a little tricky sometimes, I realize. So let's spend a little time on those. In general, at Tuck, we ask for professional recommendations. We are looking for someone who knows you well and your performance at work over time. We would rather see a recommendation. Let's start off with who should write the recommendation in terms of what level. We would rather see a recommendation from your immediate boss, even if they do not have, they are not the CEO or the managing director. They don't have to have a high title. They need to know you well and be able to answer questions about you from an in-depth perspective. If your boss's boss knows you well, they can be a great resource for your recommendation. If they're just somebody that you ride up in the elevator with or say hello to occasionally, that isn't somebody who can give an in-depth perspective of you. So that's the first thing I'd say about that. A cross-functional partner could be a great resource as well. If they know you well, and if they can really talk to your work history and your accomplishments and learnings over time, your contributions and impact over time, they can be a great resource as well. At Tuck right now, you have 2 recommendations that you are asked to provide. So it could be that you put both of those in there. We do suggest that your current supervisor is someone that you would want to consider strongly. There might be reasons why you don't have your current supervisor as one of your recommenders, so just explain that to us in the optional essay. But if you feel like somebody who's got a cross-functional partner would be able to give a different perspective, that's great to round out the perspective of your current supervisor or your supervisor's boss or whomever it might be. So those are all possibilities. So the next question, I'm sorry, I'm just reading it. How would you view a hardcore sales experience? How do you recommend demonstrating leadership there? Well, I'm going to go back to the wise leadership part, wise part of that wise leadership piece that we ask. What I would say is you need to explore, what have you done in your hardcore sales experience? How have you had impact? How have you done that work? Have you shown the ability to work across differences? I can imagine in sales, there's probably a lot of that. Have you shown good judgment, knowing when to take a risk and when not to take a risk, when to approach someone, when not to, when to make the sale and when to say this doesn't make sense? You really need to examine your own experience and think about the stories that stand out. And without stretching it or adding a lot of fluff, think about those elements of leadership that we've talked about, the confident humility, the ability to fail or learn to face challenges and be humble about it, but also the confidence to succeed. or go back and try again. So I think there's a lot of different ways you could approach that, and it really is independent to it's important to, based on your own experience, and think about what are the stories that stand out, and what are the key themes or values that you feel that you've shown in your sales experience. So you'll need to think about that more yourself, and really think about where you see leadership and what it means to you in that experience that you have. Okay. So the next question is there any specific time gap between current and last organization for the recommendations? For example, when is the last organization too old for a recommendation? Well, there is no hard and fast rule to what you should be doing in terms of who to ask for recommendations from, and it partially depends on your own work history. If you've only worked in 2 different places and you spent 5 years in one place and 1 year in another, in the older place, it may not make sense to go back to that older place unless for a recommendation, unless you feel that there's an important piece of your story that would be missing if you did not have a recommender from your first place there. But if you've only worked a year at your current employer, and you worked at another employer before that, whether it was for a short or long period of time, it might make more sense at that point to go back to a former employer. There isn't any specific time gap where we would say this is where you need to exercise judgment and decide what really makes sense for my recommendations. Who can give the best picture of me as an applicant? Who has the best knowledge of me as an applicant? Who is adding on to the picture of me as an applicant as opposed to repeating maybe something that the first recommender might say? Is there somebody who can be additive as opposed to repetitive? Now, repetition isn't necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. It can reinforce the themes of who you are as an applicant, but it is also important to remember that we want to get multiple perspectives on you. So that could be something to think about. So as I said, there's no hard and fast rule. Use your judgment, but also think about what story is it telling you, and is this something that is not going to be additive because it's similar to work I've done more recently when you look back at a former employer. Okay, so the next question is, I was laid off my work in a year. I managed to find work in a role that has less to do with leadership compared to my previous role. Any recommendation on how to navigate my situation? What I would say is, in that case, it's important. If you were laid off, that's not necessarily something that is going to be a detriment to your application, but tell us the story. Help us understand what happened and where you went and why. Sometimes it's helping us understand the industry at the time and the location you were in. For example, the energy sector has faced some challenges recently. So if you were working in energy in Texas, for example, there were some hard times, that have happened. So it would be important to give us some context for that layoff. So, or it could be individual to your company. Your company failed to get funding. So explain that in the optional essay. The other piece is that leadership is important in terms of foundational, but leadership does not mean you have to have the title of leader. It means you can show leadership in a number of different ways. It could be initiating a program or a process. It could be bringing up a challenge or addressing an opportunity. It could be mentoring a coworker. There's a lot of different ways that leadership makes sense, and do not fixate too much on having the title of leader or the role of leader. Think more, or being assigned the role of leader. Think more of how you have exemplified those qualities of leadership that we're looking for. It could be that you were not the leader, but you showed a lot of good judgment in helping your team leader in navigating the challenge. Or you showed a lot of good judgment in helping to address a problem. Or you showed the ability to work across cultures in handling a situation that dealt with a client that was outside of your home country or your culture. So those are all pieces that you can look at and remember. Now, another question we have here is, can I interview during a campus visit this spring if I plan to apply this fall for entry in 2019? We always recommend that it is best to interview during the application year that you are planning to apply. So what that means is that if you're planning to apply in the fall of 2019, we would recommend that you apply or that you interview during the 2018 to 2019 admissions season, which would start sometime this summer for us when our application goes live. You certainly could investigate the opportunity to, especially if you're coming from far away, investigate the opportunity to interview this spring. We would want to understand why you're not able to make it back to campus to interview in the fall. And sometimes people have very compelling reasons for that, from I am going to be far away, I am going to be in the middle of a huge project, I have limited resources or limited vacation, and this is when I can come. But I would encourage you to come to campus and give us your most current story, and that would be during your application season, or your admissions year, I should say. So I would encourage you, if you are planning to apply for entry in the fall of 2019, or in the fall of 2019, to interview between the fall of 2018 and the spring of 2019, depending on your application round. So the next question, how do you evaluate GRE scores? Do you convert them into an equivalent GMAT? So they are very different standardized tests in many ways. They're different, different strategies and structures to the test. What we are looking for is, again, your overall performance and how competitive it is, but also, can you do the work? That's the real question. So you need to show that. What I would say is that while it's not a perfect tool, there is a converter tool from ETS, the organization that has created the GRE, that will tell you roughly what your equivalent GMAT might be. So if you're wondering, is this a competitive GRE, that can be a helpful tool, but realize it's only a tool, and that there is a range around that number that they will give you that most likely would be your equivalent GMAT. Yes, we look at that, but more importantly is to do the very best that you can for yourself, and understand, do I feel like I'm hitting my best performance on the GRE? And you would know that by taking multiple practice tests, really studying. These are tests that you can study for and prepare for. And then if you're wondering, because we don't have a strong enough or a big enough sample size to publish our GRE scores at the moment. So if you're wondering, how does this really compare? Using that converter tool can be helpful, but please also understand that that really is a range. It's not a perfect tool. And so keep that in mind as you're doing that, conversion. Okay. So the next question is similar, is talking about how do we evaluate the GRE. So we have not published our GRE averages, so we couldn't tell you how that compares to GMAT, average GMAT scores. That's not something that we have released publicly. So that's something to keep in mind as well. The other, because we don't have a large enough sample size, as I said. We do have an increase in the number of students who have taken the GRE. We probably, in the future, you will probably be seeing more information about GRE from us, but we don't have any plans at the moment to publish those numbers, because we don't have, as I said, a strong enough or solid enough sample size. What I will say is that your strong performance in the GRE or the GMAT, they're both important. If you're wondering how they compare, again, you can use that converter tool. That can give you a sense, but a weak GRE score is not going to be helpful to you in a competitive pool. We look at the pool in total. We look at you holistically, so we will look at other pieces as well. But you do want to come in with the strongest GRE or GMAT that you can. Okay. So the next question is, I have a postgraduate graduate diploma in management from a school in India. Does TUC consider this as an admission deterrent, as it's regarded as an MBA equivalent in India? So we do clearly state that if you already have an MBA, that you will not be considered for admission unless you can make an argument to us as to why what is called an MBA to you or is very similar to an MBA is not, and there is that an MBA from Tuck is an additive to your experience, that this is not simply a repetition of the coursework that you've done in the past and the experience that you've done in the past at another school. We are looking to build the abilities of our students in wise leadership and their understanding of business fundamentals, and having a degree from another school that has done the same thing essentially is not going to be additive for you or for the school. What I would say though is if you feel that you have an argument to make, use the optional essay to explain to us why you need the MBA on top of the degree you have, if it doesn't neatly fit into one of the other essays that we will be offering for next year. The key here is to explain, because there are some people who have something that is called a postgraduate diploma in management, depending on different countries, they in different schools, they take different forms, that might have a compelling argument as to why they need an MBA. So if you feel that you have a compelling argument, present your best case and let us evaluate. We will look at the transcripts. We will look at the courses that you took there and how much overlap there is with our coursework, and make a decision and an evaluation from there. Remember, it is competitive, so you just want to keep that in mind. Okay, let's see. Next question. Okay, I work in a boutique firm. We, as well as our clients, are mostly use free email services. Does a recommendation from a free email domain hamper the application? What can I do to reduce the impact? It doesn't hamper the application. We just want to make sure that this is from your actual recommender. It's just a way to make sure that it is authentic and genuine. So the thing that you can do is provide us with contact information for that recommender. Ideally, that would either be at their work or an explanation of who they are. When we ask that, we ask the recommender to provide what's your relationship to the applicant, but simply to explain it's not unusual that some recommenders will have domain names from non-work domain names. Simply explain it's not going to be something that will hamper it unless there's something else that raises a question as to the authenticity of the recommendation. Usually not a problem. So the next question, how do you look at LinkedIn and other social media in the admissions process? There are a lot of applications. We don't check everybody's social media unless there's some reason to go in and check social media. But we do like to take a look if there is something specific somebody points to. They have an active blog presence, or that is part of the work they do. If, for example, if what you do is social media for your organization or company, sometimes we may check it out because we may not understand the company or the organization, and we want to learn more about it. Or we've had people who started nonprofits or community organizations, and we want to see more about that and learning about them. It's an opportunity to get to know you as a person. I think the key thing here is with all social media, realize that the potential is there that somebody will be viewing it, will be seeing it. And so you want to make sure it's appropriate and professionally oriented, or the things that are on your personal pages are things that you would be comfortable having an admissions office see. Because while we don't necessarily check all of them, there's a chance that we will. In addition, just because we don't doesn't mean other schools won't. So you do want to keep that in mind. Just like you would always want to have a professional email account name, you would want to keep in mind the optics of your social media and what it is telling the admissions office about you. Okay, so this is somebody's just putting it right out there. So let's answer this one. Would you consider rejecting an application with a low GPA GMAT because it would hurt the class profile averages you report? Well, one of the things I would say is that we don't have minimum cutoffs. And I say that not because somebody told me to say it, but it's because it's true. We have ranges. If you have a low GPA, we want to know that you can do the work. And if there is nothing else that indicates you do the work, that you can do the work, then yes, that is going to hurt your chances, because we don't want people to not be able to succeed in our rigorous curriculum. One way we can assess that is by your academic performance. Another way is by your GMAT or GRE. So let's say you have a low GPA, but your GMAT or GRE is very strong. It might tell us that, all right, you underperformed in your academics, but you do have the ability. Now, we're not going to take necessarily one test score as the sole example of your ability to perform. So we're going to look for other things as well, maybe in your work experience. Are you working in, a particularly rigorous industry, and have you performed well there? So we're going to look at, again, everything in context. Or let's flip that. If you have a low GMAT or GRE, but a strong academic background, we're going to look at that as well. We are not managing to a number. We want to get a diverse class. The fortunate position we're in is that we have a wide variety of different types of applications that come in, and we have a robust applicant pool, and it is very competitive. So from your standpoint as an applicant, you do want to consider submitting the strongest application you can. So a low GPA or GMAT, GRE might hurt you in the application pool because there are options, which is why you always, for us as a school, which is why you always want to submit your strongest application as possible so you can be as competitive as possible. Okay. So this next question kind of relates into that same question. If a non-traditional applicant does not have strong quant classes on university transcript, is strong GMAT quant score and quant professional experience enough or evidence enough to show potential? Academic quant proof is not a must. We've had people who have taken no academic quantitative courses, but they have worked in a quantitative industry, or they've done well on their GMAT or GRE, or they have taken steps in order to boost their quantitative courses. And they have strong positives in other areas that, again, that holistic process we want to look at. So no, it is not a must. It is a piece of the puzzle on only one piece. It is important for you to think about, does my background, does my work experience, do my academic numbers and test scores indicate that I can succeed in the coursework, both quantitative as well as qualitative? So if you look at it and say, wow, I'm not sure somebody can see that I would do well in the kind of coursework that an MBA requires, I need to make sure that I am stating my case clearly. Whether that means you assess that I want to take a quantitative class, you could take one online, or you could take one in person, in class in a brick and mortar school. But there's lots of options. Or I want to take the GMAT one more time, or GRE one more time, because I know it's not indicative of my ability to perform. And I want to highlight for people that, for admissions committees, that I can perform. So again, remember, it is taken in context. It is a holistic process. We look at everything. You do not have to have quantitative courses, but quantitative courses are one thing we will look at. We want to know you can succeed in the coursework. So what I would say, so somebody said regarding the GRE, it's interesting. I wonder where Poets and Quants gets info. What I would say is Poets and Quants does a great job of sharing information that they have. I don't know where they get all their information as well. Some of it's mined from things that they find online and data that they find online. Some of it's mined from other pieces. What I would say is I would always take things with keep a skeptical eye on information that you see that does not come straight from a school or from data that the school has released to a ranking where they do release accurate data. So you just be thoughtful about the information that you see online and recognize that it may not always be the full picture. It may be a partial picture that has been released out there, but may not contain the whole piece of information. So a couple things I'm going to say are we're starting to run out of time. I have a couple questions left. So I'm going to answer those questions and then we're going to wrap up. Really appreciate everyone and your active participation. And thank you again. I will say thank you when we're all done as well, but I just want to say this is a great, robust conversation. So how do you weigh early action applications versus round 1 and round 2 applicants? What I would say is that everybody is part of that holistic process. Early applicants, obviously, they're getting in front of us in advance of other applicants. There are more seats in the class at that point. The applicant pool is at its smallest at that point as well. So, you know, it can be something where you can feel like there are more opportunities to make your case, and the competition may not feel as strong. The other piece I would say, though, is we admit very strong applicants in every round. We also have an April round, which isn't mentioned in there. So we do applications in early action, which is in October for us, November, January, and an April round coming up. And that application deadline is April 4th. So again, we admit strong applicants in every round. We look for people to be excited to come to Tuck, and you can be excited in every round. Show that you've done your research. Early action just is an opportunity for people, if they are excited about Tuck, to apply early, get their admissions decision early, and if they are admitted, commit early, and just get that off your plate. So, okay, last question. What are your policies on international aid? In other words, financial aid for international students. So financial aid takes has two components. One is scholarships, fellowships, and the other is loans. And so I think our financial aid office has a robust website about loans. I won't go too much into those, but all students can apply for loans. We do offer competitive loan package for qualified students, and you can find out more on our website. And the other piece I'd say about scholarships is every student or every admitted student is considered for a scholarship. Your application for admission to Tuck is your application for scholarships as well. So every student is considered. We do offer scholarships to students across the board in terms of it's not limited by where whether you're a United States citizen or not. So we do consider international students for scholarships as well. We use scholarships to help us yield a great class. And so there is a merit component to it, and that's important to remember as well. All right, thank you so much, everyone. I enjoyed talking with you today. It was a lot of me talking, but you guys had great questions. Happy to have joined you, and thank you so much for joining us. We are excited. If you are interested in learning more about Tuck, as I said, use those great resources that I mentioned on this page here that I'm just putting back up online. Go to our website, go to some of our events. We are traveling around the world. Our students and alumni will be hosting events as well. You'll have a chance to meet them. And we're excited to learn more about you through the application and admissions process. Thank you.